I guess one of the things that's really interesting is that, we just don't have a roadmap for this. None of us in our lifetime, I don't think there's a person alive who, has been through a global pandemic since the last one was over 100 years ago. So it's a lot of this is being sort of made up, is being written as we go along here. It's not a playbook. That playbook is being created now.
Colin, thank you so much for being on another special edition of the Made in America podcast, COVID-19 edition. It's really a pleasure to have you on. I'm excited to hear you talk about where the state's posture is. And you've been such a long time person in the manufacturing ecosystem in Connecticut. I'm really interested to hear your feedback on what's going on in the future. So thank you for taking the time.
Well, thanks for having me. Always enjoy talking about Connecticut manufacturing. There's a lot more going on right now than there usually is at any given time. So a lot of different things than we normally would be talking about.
Absolutely. Well, listen, for people who didn't see the first episode and may not know who you are, give us a little, what do you make and why do you make it?
Okay. Well, I'm the state's chief manufacturing officer. I've been in that position for about 5 months. At this point, it feels like about 5 years. It's been very active. I started my career as a design engineer for Pratt & Whitney, had a number of different jobs and actually careers along the way. The last 20 years before I started with the state, I was the chief executive officer and then executive chairman of the Whitcraft Group, which is a Connecticut-based aerospace manufacturing business. So I was oh so close to retiring when this opportunity came up with the state. I thought that I potentially could be helpful, so I jumped in, and it has been a wild ride.
Nope. Nobody expects a global pandemic. Is that what we're saying?
Yes. Yeah. That was not on the list of outcomes.
No. So let's talk a little bit about that. Last time we talked, Colin, the biggest thing on everybody's mind, including yours, kind of going into this chief manufacturing officer, and we spent a lot of time talking about workforce development. I think we said the top 3 priorities were workforce, and workforce. And I think things have maybe changed a little bit. So can you talk a little bit about, how they've changed and what the focus is now?
Yeah, certainly. Boy, that seems like a lifetime ago. Just before we leave workforce development, the underlying trends in manufacturing that were driving the need for workforce development, which were, the aged workforce in Connecticut and the attrition that we'll be facing, and then the rapid rate at which technology is coming to bear in manufacturing, really drive both the need to train new workers and to upskill incumbent workers. And those long-term trends still hold and will hold after this. But right now, that's not the priority. And it's amazing how the world has really shifted in the last 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, 6 weeks ago, we were talking about workforce development. So let me just give you a little bit of a run through sort of how focus and priorities have changed over the last really month or so. And really, it seems like they certainly change day to day, and sometimes they even change hour to hour. Forward, and I guess one of the things that's really interesting is that we just don't have a roadmap for this. None of us in our lifetime, I don't think there's a person alive who has been through a global pandemic since the last one was over 100 years ago. So it's a lot of this is being sort of made up, is being written as we go along here. It's not a playbook. That playbook is being created now, and it's been amazing at how rapidly that playbook has been written and executed. I know people get frustrated when things don't happen right away, but I think once we get past this and people have a little bit of the lens of time to look at things, they'll say, wow, a lot was accomplished in a very short period of time. So as I, look back, I was, before we got on the phone today, I was looking back through my notes for something impact about a month ago, and just sort of looking how my priorities have shifted. When this whole thing came upon us, we all became aware of the significant impact, both the public health impact and the economic impact of this pandemic. The federal government, came out with a couple of initiatives in and around sick leave and paid family leave. The state made some modifications to its unemployment insurance program, and there was a lot of discussion on how those were going to impact companies, what the rules and regs were, how they interplayed, and whatnot. And that was a real focus. We moved from there into, at least at the state level, focusing on developing and implementing a bridge loan program for state companies to help with their liquidity issues, and focus in and around that. And I can sort of come back to that. We then, became clear that we were going to need to, at a state level, a governor was going to start enforcing some social distance requirements and really, regulating businesses and determining what were essential businesses that should keep operating, and what weren't. So there was a tremendous amount of activity. I remember he announced it, I think, on a Friday. We obviously had heads up. It was a collective decision on this, but a lot of work went in over the weekend to develop that list of essential businesses and refine it, which was at least right after that weekend. And then there were some modifications made along the way. In and around that time, we started to focus on, I started canvassing manufacturing companies on, and all of manufacturing was deemed essential. So I started canvassing companies to try to understand how they were meeting the sort of the competing objectives of assuring the workforce safety of their workforce, but also business continuity, keep running the business. And
what did you find?
Well, when I first initially started canvassing, I found people were a little flat-footed, again, because none of us had been through this before. And so what we did is we reached out to Pratt & Whitney, a large employer in the state, large manufacturer with multinational operations, and knew that they had operations in China and Italy and Washington State, which were the hotspots at the time. So they graciously agreed to, the head of their crisis management team agreed to get on the phone with about 200 manufacturers and go through sort of their emergency checklist and the policies and procedures that they had developed and were implementing in response to this. So that was a good starting point to really get people focused and get sort of jumpstart everybody on this. And then there were a tremendous amount of discussions that went around and comparing of notes. There's no proprietary approach on this. Whenever somebody came up with a better idea, that was sort of circulated around folks.
Is there a place to go now? Like, is any of that being saved in any one place? Like, if someone's thinking to themselves, do I have the latest thinking? Do I have the most current information? Where would they go to find that? Do you have a recommendation?
And all of that, that's a great question. All of that got distilled into the safe workplace rules for essential employers in Connecticut, which we released earlier this week. So you can Google that, Connecticut Safe Workplace Rules, and see that. That was announced as an executive order this week. It was that process again. It was really it was sort of a greatest hits of what all these different businesses are doing. We had input from dozens of businesses on things that they were doing and where we thought things made sense. We incorporated them. We actually circulated some drafts of these workplace rules amongst the manufacturing community to get their input. They also circulated through the Connecticut state government to get different departments input. Them, obviously, Department of Public Health had some input on that. So we really try to get all the stakeholders get some input on it, and synthesize it down. So now it's a document that really focuses on who should have access to the workplace, controlling contact between employees and customers, eliminating transmission points, best practice for employees. What do you do if somebody feels ill or tests positive? How do you react to that in the workplace? And then we had a separate section just really on some rules and regulations focused on the construction industry.
What do you hear in terms of the ability for the manufacturers to kind of to execute in this kind of dual competing situation, right? One, I want to keep people safe. We want to keep social distancing and all that. And I'm sure that has an impact on workforce availability. And then at the same time, I'm trying to keep producing. What do you hear about people kind of how they're addressing those competing priorities?
It really is a balance that people need to strike. And I would say in my discussions that the top priority with the business owners I'm talking to is definitely their workforce. I mean, people have long relationships with the people they work with, and they're very concerned about the health and well-being of the workforce. There's no right answer. Some companies are just saying, we're just shutting down for 2 weeks. Others really don't have that opportunity. I mean, the viability of their business is really relying on them continuing to get in there and serve their customers. If you've got a customer who has sources in China and if you shut your business now, they're going to move that work, and it really dims the prospect of getting it back. So it's a balance. A lot of discussions going in around this daily on how to do that. The good news is, we have not heard to this point, knock wood, that any of the manufacturing work sites have been hotspots. So
right.
I think they've done a good job. And owners, business leaders, owners are really giving people who feel very uncomfortable about this, particularly people with risk factors, saying, look, don't come to work. So even those who are up and operating have, the best case I've heard is 10% of the workforce is out, and it's more likely you're going to have 20, 30, or even 40% of the workforce out because of risk factors or concerns, various sundry different concerns. So people are just trying to adjust as best they can.
If you were running, if you were running one of the 4,000 manufacturers in Connecticut again, from your vantage point, I think you've got now, some people, when we're in it, right, it's hard for us to see the forest through the trees because we're one of the trees stuck in the middle, kind of, dealing with the day-to-day workforce challenges and talking to suppliers and customers and collections and all that. So I think you maybe have a bit of an opportunity to take a step back and look at the big picture. What recommendations would you have for a manufacturer to kind of help get through this in the best way possible? And maybe you've got different thoughts if you manufacture different stuff. But do you have any actionable ideas as a business owner, what we should be doing and what good advice we could have to get through this as best we can?
Well, I one lifetime ago, I was in crisis management and worked for crisis management turnaround firm. And really the focus always there was liquidity, cash. You got to have some cash on hand. I think people are aware of that. And I think, the people will be in good stead of the people who, protected their cash early. People in financial institutions were, you saw them immediately go and make draws on their revolver. So they had the cash available. So they didn't have to come later to try to get it. Because we saw in 08, 09 that those funds that were available under revolving credit facilities weren't available under credit facilities if you waited too long. Really focus on your cost structure. Again, employers are trying to these competing objectives of sort of lowering their cost structure, protecting their workforce and their employees. So, one of the things that I'm hearing is, one company that I'm familiar with is, and this is also sort of protecting the workforce too, right? Taking half the workforce and furloughing them, say, for 2 weeks. they furlough, they get to collect unemployment for that period of time. Then they come back and work 2 weeks, the other half furlough. So the employer really gets to cut their payroll by 50%. Their employees still collect 50% of what they would on the work weeks they're not working, and also it protects the integrity of the business. You have half the workforce essentially isolated from the other half. So, again, I think, different people are approaching things different ways. The larger you are, the more financially secure you are, the more options you have. And we've got a lot of small businesses here that don't have a lot of financial wherewithal. They really need to focus on things. And unfortunately, I think some of the small businesses, sort of the Main Street type businesses, it's going to be tough if this continues for them to come out on the backside. Now that being said, on the good side, I think from a public health perspective, things are starting to look a little better.
Right.
That's good trends recently. This social distancing that we're all practicing is having an impact. Flatten the curve, another term nobody used a month ago. Now it's part of the lexicon. It seems to be working. So we're getting some good data on the public health side. But I think we're going to need to continue these practices for some period of time.
What are some of the opportunities? I know you've been another thing you probably weren't expecting to be called as the chief manufacturing officer was a matchmaker. But there's been some terminology around that coming out recently. And I think, there are some challenges, but wherever there's challenges, there's opportunity. What are some of what is your matchmaker role and how has that been helpful to manufacturing in Connecticut?
Yeah, so let me just sort of back up and sort of put this in perspective. So as this public health crisis unfolded, it became apparent that there were some real shortages of critical medical equipment supplies out there. And so the state convened as a number of sort of emergency response teams, crisis management teams in place. I've joined one of them, and it's led by a fellow who works for the state, is also working for Homeland Security. And there's a team there that is canvassing the state, primarily working with healthcare providers to identify shortages and then sort of consolidate those shortages across different institutions of the state, roll it all up and quantify the shortage. So there's a team who's identifying and quantifying shortages. There's another team state comprised of the purchasing folks at Department of Administrative Services. There's about a half a dozen of them who are sort of focused on traditional channels to procure these shortage items. So that would be going to manufacturers who traditionally make these things or distributors who traditionally distribute these products. As you can imagine, those sort of normal channels are overtaxed right now. The leads are coming in. Everybody seems to know a guy who knows a guy who could get N95 masks out of China. I think the state, last I checked, and a lot of those leads are coming to me that I hand off to this purchasing team. We had well over 500 leads, and every one of those is being followed, pursued, and whatnot. But I can tell you, even sort of normal distribution channels or sourcing channels that may have been functional a month ago or even 2 weeks ago have broken down, and the rules are changing hourly on the ground in China. So to that end, we've been working with some multinational Connecticut businesses that have multinational operations, have boots on the ground in China, and they have been very responsive, and they have dedicated resources. So we have people over there, visiting factories, working through logistics, organizing the logistics to get product back here. And so we're dealing directly with manufacturers over there. Where the normal channels of procurement don't work, we're now working with the Connecticut Manufacturing Group, manufacturers, to sort of repurpose their capabilities and their capacity to make a number of these critical shortage items. And again, we've had scores of companies put their hand up saying, I want to help out. So what we're doing is we're cataloging that, talking with them, understanding their capabilities, but it's not just whether you can make the product. It's also do you have sort of the gumption to get in there and follow the supply chain and try to get, because there's a shortage all the way up to the raw materials for these things. So, but it's been really heartening. There are, companies, literally scores of companies that we're working with right now to bring up capacity, and it's being done now. And so the way we've approached that is the state can't or is not in a good position to purchase from these non-traditional sources of supply because they're not in an opinion to know what's adequate and what's not. I mean, if you've got somebody who's coming up, a good example is Webco Plastics. They're making face shields now. Those are not going to be OSHA-approved face shields. But we don't need them to be impact resistant, right? We need them to be functional for the use intended. So, if you couple them with a healthcare provider who they can work through sort of the iterations of the design, the healthcare provider can say, yeah, that's fine, that works, and then put in a purchase order. Once that's happened, then I can go to the state and say, okay, these guys have the good housekeeping seal of approval. A great example of that is a guy, Neil Gilman from Gilman Gear. It's a 70-year-old football equipment manufacturer. Neil put his hand up early. He not only said he wanted to do things, he didn't need a lot of hand holding. So in very short order, he went to his local hospital, got a gown, made a prototype. It wasn't really what we needed. Got a surgical gown, made a prototype. Worked with the folks at Yale, who are a SWAT team. They went through a couple of different iterations, then modification of the material, and then finally got something that was suitable for their needs. I think he's got an order now. He's working through making 8,000 of those for Yale New Haven Hospital, and so that story repeats itself. Whether it's masks, face shields, gowns. We've got people working on different components on ventilators. Collins Aerospace is working on an O2 generation system that can potentially. It has good applications in field hospitals, but potentially could be used for some people who otherwise would need to go on a ventilator, but may be able to keep some of them off to help balance that supply-demand capacity. So, the volume of inbound requests and offers to help has been such that I've enlisted the folks. I'm working now with the folks at Concept. And CBIA who are helping out with this, and now we've developed a database, and then the folks at Concept have a programmer or web developer who's now going to take that, put it onto a web application. So within a few business days, we hope to have a functional web where we can start, collecting the information and then using this as a more automated tool for matchmaking.
So connect the supply with the demand.
Exactly. And then we're also working with, we've got contacts with Connecticut Hospital Association for them to go out and again, act as a filter and a consolidator of people who have critical needs that aren't being met by traditional channels. And there's some wonderful stuff going on. We could do a whole nother webcast on all these things these companies are doing. So to help that, one of the things that we announced this week was we've made a modification to the Manufacturing Innovation Fund voucher program, and there was about $1.3 million available in that program. And so we're now giving priority to companies that are looking to either repurpose their capacity and capabilities to make these, or are making critical items and are looking to increase their output of them. So we've got availability of grants of up to $75,000
to be able to retrofit their gear to try their equipment or set up a new line or update cell to try and make this happen. Yeah, and how would if someone wanted to get that money, how do they apply for that?
So they go through the typical Manufacturing Innovation Fund voucher program link. So they can go to Connecticut Manufacturing Innovation Fund. Also, the link actually clicks through to CCAT, CCAT is our partner on that. They're administering a lot of the, they're doing a lot of the administrative work with that in terms of collecting the applications and vetting them. And this is a program that's going to need a bit more due diligence than the traditional voucher program. So it was announced 2 days ago, and that evening they had 500 hits on their website for it. And we actually last night we had a sort of due diligence call on the first application that came through.
Nice.
And so they're starting to flow through. And look, we're also looking at using the voucher program also for a source of funds to help companies as we look beyond this current situation. There are discussions both with the legislature and the folks at David Lehman on putting some additional funds into the voucher program to help companies as we get through this and start to emerge on the other side. And so what that looks like and sort of what the focus of that is still very much in discussion. But we're starting to pick our heads up a little bit. We've been looking 2 inches in front of our nose for the last 4 weeks, and we're starting to look a little further out and say, okay, what's life going to be like after this, and how do we help the Connecticut?
Well, let's pull on that thread a little bit, because we started the conversation and we're starting to wrap up. We started the conversation talking a lot about, that the macro trends that were driving some of the manufacturing growth in Connecticut that we talked about when we met last year. Those trends seem to still be there long term. The aging workforce, the turnover in the workforce, the change in technology, manufacturing 4.0, the large scale macroeconomic trends for aerospace and air travel miles, globally, obviously the building of the submarines and defense. So a lot of those things I think are still in play. Number one, do you agree with that? And if you do, as we start to look up beyond, as you said, sort of 2 inches in front, what is your feeling about manufacturing in Connecticut long term, and what position do we need to be in to be successful in that long term?
Well, I think, as we look through sort of current state, there are certain sectors that have been, decimated in the near term. Aerospace, you just talked about. You and I were talking earlier today that air passenger traffic is down by 95%. That has never happened in the history of air travel. So this is uncharted territory. That industry is going to take a while to rebound. It's not going to snap back. It's going to take a while to come back. Other industries, defense-related industries, you mentioned subs. That's relatively unscathed. I think government, if anything, is going to be probably putting more resources behind some of the defense as a way to help out. Talking with some of the aerospace people, the defense programs are solid, if not increasing. So certain industries or sectors are doing very well in this crisis, but it has cut a wide swath through the manufacturing community, and the impact and the magnitude, long-term implications are just starting to be realized now. So we'll have to, we'll sort of have to see how things play out. But look, we do have, we've got a lot of world leaders in some critical industries here. I think that's going to continue after that. Our focus has been and will continue to be in manufacturing, really to be on the advanced manufacturing side of things. That's where we felt the long-term, the state was best positioned with the skilled workforce we have. We still got a very skilled workforce. We have availability of skilled workers now, which we didn't before, and we need to make sure that we capitalize on it as we come out of this, and really not only reestablish our market share, but really try to use this as an opportunity to increase market share, right? Good companies increase market share in down markets.
That's right.
We need to focus on.
And do you see yourself having a role, and what's the state's role in helping the great manufacturers in Connecticut rebound strongly and take advantage? Like you said, great companies in downturns tend to increase market share. What can the state do, and what can you do in your role to help make that happen?
Well, I think the state's doing a lot right now, as is the federal government, just on providing capital, people to get through this, right? You know, and if we don't get through the short run, or if a company doesn't get through the short run, then the long run doesn't matter much to it. So we need to make sure that people have the resources to get through it. We want to try to keep the workforce intact as much as possible and productive. In fact, we're talking with Garrett Moran and his group at the Governor's Workforce Development Council. There's some discussions now on trying to make some online learning tools available to furloughed workers. So this could be a good opportunity for them to use the time that they have to increase their skills. So they're more marketable and more productive on the backside of it. You know, again, we're looking to both provide you know, capital on the backside of this where we can, and guidance. And there's a lot been done in terms of trying to knock down, you know, regulatory burdens and hurdles for companies. So I think, yeah, the state does have a role to play on this. And also, you know, we had a strategic plan that had been unveiled for the state in terms of economic development. I think that's going to have to be looked at again to make sure that all of that still holds in the environment that we find ourselves on the backside of this. I mean, there are a lot of smart, capable people that are working awfully hard here. You know, emails are coming in. I go to bed and I'm 450 emails behind, and I wake up in the morning and I'm not sleeping very long, and I'm 500 emails, you know, behind by the time I get up. So stuff really is this. People in state government are really working 24/7, and everybody understands this is an unprecedented situation, and you know, the worst of times are bringing out the best in people. So I'm very, you know, you're right. We will get through it. We'll get on the backside of this, and there's going to be a lot of interesting books written about it.
Absolutely. Well, if there's one thing I think we can all agree to, it's absolutely an interesting time to be alive. Books will be written, and people will be asking, how'd you make it through that COVID thing back in 2020? So we'll be there to tell the story. Colin, thank you so much for coming on today. It's awesome to see you. I look forward to hopefully being able to see you face to face once this social distancing thing is behind us.
All right, great. Thanks so much for having me.
You got it.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by IT Direct.
As always, thanks so much for tuning in. I definitely want your feedback and hope you subscribe. But what I want the most is to build a community where we learn and grow with each other. I hope you're getting a lot of value out of the time we're spending together. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you next time.